for a story does not walk into the heart unless the heart is ready to receive it. Long ago, before the dust of forgetfulness covered the footprints of our ancestors, there stood a village called Jagoog. It was not the largest village in the land, nor the richest, nor the most feared, but it was a place where the drums spoke, where the griots sang, and where every sunrise brought both hope and hardship in equal measure. Jagoog lay in the arms of the savannah, where the tall grasses swayed like dancers in the evening wind and the baobab trees stood like ancient warriors guarding the memories of the land. The air was rich with the smell of earth after rain, with the smoke of cooking fires, and with the laughter of children who chased goats and dreams with the same energy. The people of Jagoog were farmers, herders, traders, and craftsmen. At dawn, the women balanced calabashes of water on their heads with the grace of queens, while the men led their cattle to graze or tilled the stubborn soil with calloused hands. At night, families gathered around fires, telling tales of spirits, heroes, and fools. But do not be deceived, life in Jagoog was not filled with gold. Poverty sat beside many cooking pots like an uninvited guest. Some families slept on mats worn thin by time. Some children knew the sound of hunger better than the sound of their own laughter. Yet the people of Jagoog carried their struggles with dignity, for they believed as the elders said. Even the poorest man owns the breath that carries his name. In one humble compound on the outskirts of the village lived a couple, Enda, the father, and Sira, the mother. They were not people of wealth, nor did they possess land that stretched beyond the horizon. Their hut was small, their roof patched with hope and millet stalks, and their meals were often measured not by fullness but by faith. Enda was a quiet man, the kind whose footsteps do not announce him and whose words come only when they are needed. Sira was gentle but strong, with eyes that saw more than she spoke. Though hardship slept in their home, they held on to kindness like a blanket against cold times. For many years, they remained without a child. The whispers of the village crept like smoke through the air. Perhaps the ancestors have closed their calabash. Perhaps the spirits are silent in their house. But Sira would smile and say, "The calabash that is last to pour may hold the sweetest water." And Enda, though his voice was few, would nod in agreement. Seasons passed. Rains came and went. The moon watched as children were born to others, while silence remained in their compound. Yet they did not curse the sky, nor did they blame the earth. Then, one Harmattan morning, when the wind carried dust like stray memories and the trees whispered secrets, something changed in their home. Sira felt a stirring, not in the world outside, but within herself. She spoke no word of it at first, letting time reveal what only the spirit knows before the body understands. Weeks turned to months, and the village began to suspect. The women smiled knowingly, the elders stroked their beards. The drums of gossip beat softly at first, then louder. At last, it was clear, Sira carried a child. The old women of the village clapped their hands and said, "Ah! The tree that waits long often bears a stronger fruit." And the men nodded, as if they had always known. Hope returned to Enda and Sira's compound like a traveler who had only paused on the road. But, listen carefully, this was no ordinary child forming in the quiet dark of the womb. Even before his first breath, the winds around the village shifted as though the spirits were whispering to one another. The griots would later say, "When destiny walks toward the world, even the ground prepares a path." And so, the birth drew near, and with it, the beginning of a tale that would grow legs and travel farther than any man's footsteps. Ah, my friend, when a child is born, the heavens blink and the earth takes note. But when a child of destiny enters the world, even the spirits sit up and listen. The night Sira went into labor, the moon hid behind a thin veil of clouds, as though watching quietly from the shadows. The wind that usually danced through the grasses of Jagoog grew still, and the stars above, like the eyes of ancestors, seemed to gather in silence. In their humble hut, lit only by a flickering oil lamp and the soft glow of burning shea wood, Sira labored with the help of two elder women, Mayama and old Isatu, who had brought many children into the world and buried many more. Enda sat just outside the doorway, his hands clasped, his heart beating like a drum before war. Though he was a man of few words, his silence now was a prayer the heavens surely heard. The village dogs did not bark that night. The owls did not hoot. And the crickets, who usually held counsel in the tall grass, fell silent, as if all of creation awaited the arrival of the child. When the moment came, it was not with the wail of anger nor the cry of fear that many infants bring into the world. No. This child entered with a sound that was gentle but clear, like a flute playing at dawn. Ma Yama gasped. Old Isatu clapped once and muttered, "By the bones of my ancestors, this one has come before." The child's eyes opened before his first swaddle was tied. Not the cloudy, wandering eyes of newborns, no. His gaze was steady, deep, almost searching, as though he remembered something the world had forgotten. When Sira held him, she felt a calm pass through her body, like cool water over tired feet. Enda, peering through the doorway, could not stop the tear that slipped down his cheek, though he quickly wiped it away, lest the elders laugh and call him a woman. By sunrise, word had already begun to travel. You know how news runs faster than a cheetah when the village is still waking. The women at the wells whispered. They say the child did not cry like others. They say he came out with his eyes open. They say the wind stopped to listen. But whispers alone are not proof, and Jagoog was a place where people respected mystery, but they also waited to see it with their own eyes. As the boy grew, signs of his difference appeared like footprints in wet earth. Before he could walk, he listened. Before he could talk, he watched. And before most children his age knew their mother's name, he understood the tone of her heart. When other toddlers stumbled after goats or splashed in basins of water, this child sat quietly, stacking stones in perfect balance or tracing patterns in the dust that even elders could not understand. One afternoon, when he was barely 3 reigns old, the elders gathered under the ancient baobab tree to settle a dispute between two farmers arguing over the boundary of a field. Voices rose, tempers climbed, and even the chief's words could not bring peace. The child wandered to the circle, his bare feet silent on the earth. Without speaking, he picked up a dry twig, walked to the ground between the farmers, and drew a line. Then he stepped back and looked up at the elders as though his work was done. The argument stopped. The men blinked at each other, then at the child, then at the line on the earth. As if the spirits themselves had spoken, both men nodded in agreement without a single word. From that day, old men began to say, this boy is not like the others. His tongue may be small, but his spirit speaks loudly. By the time he could form sentences, his words were as measured as an elder's. Children liked to follow him, though he did not join their noisy games. Animals did not fear him. Birds perched near him without flapping away, and goats trailed behind him as if he had been born with salt in his pockets. When he reached the age where naming ceremonies are discussed, the elders asked Enda and Sira what they would call him. Sira smiled the way dawn smiles before sunrise. Enda placed a hand on the child's head and spoke for the first time that morning. His name shall be Yangal Baat. A murmur rose among the gathered villagers. It was a name in their tongue that meant, wiser than a king. A bold name, a dangerous name, a name the earth itself would test. Some elders nodded slowly, others frowned. A few exchanged glances that spoke of worry. But Enda and Sira were calm. They named him not from arrogance, but from the quiet certainty only parents of destiny ever know. And the griot who witnessed it would later say, names are seeds, some grow into shade, others into thunder. What they did not know, what even the wind did not yet suspect, was that the name would carry not just honor, but trouble. For names have ears, and in the land of kings, certain words travel quickly. Ah, my friend, a name is like smoke, it rises and spreads before the fire beneath it is even seen. And so it was with the boy called Yangal Baat. At first, the name was spoken softly, by his mother as she bathed him, by his father as he carved small toys for him from fallen wood, by the elders when they passed him and saw that his eyes carried questions older than his bones. But names, especially names that challenge the order of things, do not stay hidden long. Soon, the people of Jagoog began to tell stories in low voices. Have you seen the boy Enda and Sira named Yangal Baat? They say he understands before you explain. I saw him separate 2 boys fighting without lifting a hand. Just one look, and they stopped. A child of 5 seasons once solved a riddle that left grown men scratching their heads. The whispers did not come only from homes. They traveled with the traders who carried cola nuts and salt to distant markets. They slipped into the ears of drummers who beat messages across the plains. They nestled in the songs of women pounding millet and the murmurs of shepherds resting in the shade. And like a bird with strong wings, the name flew. The child who listened before he spoke. By the time Yangal Baat could run without stumbling, his mind was already running faster than those twice his height. When the other children fought over scraps of roasted yam, he would divide it evenly without being asked, and somehow, none complained. When elders sat beneath the baobab tree to discuss matters of water, land, or cattle, he did not interrupt as children do. He would sit nearby, quiet as evening, shaping small animals from clay or drawing circles and lines in the dust. One day, two hunters, Faru and Gando, argued over who had the right to a large antelope caught in a snare on the outskirts of the forest. Each claimed his trap had caught it. Voices rose. A crowd gathered. Threats grew like thorns. Young Yangal Baat, no more than 6 reins old, walked to the carcass, bent down, and studied it carefully. Then he followed the drag marks to 2 separate snare lines that had somehow crossed each other in the night. He stood between the men and pointed to the path the antelope had taken before its capture. Without a word, he picked up a stone and placed it exactly where both ropes had tangled, then looked at the hunters. They understood. The chief hunter declared, "The boy has shown that the beast chose its own death. Let the meat be shared." And so it was. That day, even the most skeptical of elders began to say, "This one listens to the ground itself." A mind that saw paths before they formed. Another time, during the season when riverbeds begin to dry and tempers rise with the sun, a group of women returned from the stream arguing over whose pot had cracked first and blocked the path of water in the narrow channel. While the dispute grew, Yangal Baat wandered to the stream with a calabash in his hand. Without speaking, he removed the cracked shard that blocked the water's flow, then began to dig a small side channel with his bare hands, allowing water to pass through both directions. The women stared, then burst into laughter, not mocking laughter, but the kind that releases tension like rain bursting from clouds. They returned home in peace. From that day, one of the elder women began to call him, the child with old eyes. The first signs of trouble. But remember, when a drum beats too loudly, even those who dance may begin to worry. Not everyone in Jagoog was comfortable with the whispers around the boy. Some said his mind was a gift. Others, more cautious, said such wisdom in a child could draw envy like flies to ripe fruit. One evening, as the sun melted into the horizon and shadows stretched like tired hunters, the village griot, old Maru, spoke to Enda. "Be careful, my brother," he said as he stroked his beard. "A child who shines too brightly may blind the eyes of the powerful." Enda nodded but said nothing. He knew that a river cannot hide its sound simply because someone fears the flood. Still, the name Yangal Baat continued to travel, on the tongues of travelers, in the memories of visitors, across fields and rivers, beyond villages and markets. And as the elders like to warn, when a story grows legs, even the wind cannot stop it from reaching the ears of a king. What no one knew was that a man of power, far from Jagoog, had already heard the name, and did not smile when he did. My friend, the wind is a gossip, and a name that carries wonder does not stay in one village for long. What begins as a whisper in a compound can become thunder in a palace, and that is how the name Yangal Baat reached the ears of a king. Far beyond Jagoog, where the land stretched into plains, and plains rose into hills, there was a kingdom called Teninga. Its king, Zubiri Danladi, was a ruler both feared and respected. His voice was law, his shadow carried weight, and his pride was taller than the walls of his palace. In Teninga, praise singers often followed the king with drums and flutes, calling his titles in the marketplaces. Lion of the plains, eater of wisdom, the king whose voice commands the clouds. And the king never stopped them, not even once. For many years, no one in the lands around Teninga dared to claim wisdom equal to his, let alone greater. But fate has a way of kicking dust into a man's eyes just when he thinks he sees clearly. It was a traveling merchant named Boro, a man with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, who first carried the rumor to the palace. After selling salt, leather, and beads in Jagoog, he spent a night by the fire listening to villagers speak of the boy who could solve quarrels and see answers before questions were finished. He heard the name as they spoke it with pride. Yangal Baat, wiser than a king. Boro did not stay long in Jagoog. At dawn, he gathered his goods and journeyed on, but the name traveled with him like a passenger on his tongue. And in every village where he stopped, He repeated the tale, sometimes as it was, sometimes with extra spices to make eyes widen. By the time he reached the kingdom of Teninga, the story had already grown feathers. A boy who speaks like an elder. A child born with eyes that remember other lives. A name that means more wisdom than a king could carry. These words drifted like smoke through the markets, into the courtyards, past the guards, and finally to the throne where King Zubiri sat in his great hall built of red earth and polished wood. When the king first heard the story from one of his advisors, he laughed, not from humor, but disbelief. A child, he scoffed. Named what? The advisor bowed low and replied, they call him Yangal Baat, my king. In their tongue, it means. I know what it means. King Zubiri snapped, his nostrils flaring. Wiser than a king, and who is this king he is wiser than? The advisor kept his eyes on the floor. The drummers in the hall fell silent. The king rose from his seat, his robe sweeping behind him like a proud storm. He paced, each step echoing off the clay walls. No one in my lands, no child in any hut, no farmer's son, no trader's boy will carry such a name while I sit on this throne, he said. Wisdom has a home, and it lives in the palace, not on the lips of villagers. Some elders in the court exchanged glances but said nothing. For who challenges a lion in his den? King Zubiri turned to his messenger, a tall man named Geta. Find the boy's family, the king ordered. Bring them to me. I will see with my own eyes if this child holds wisdom or if his name is only an insult wearing sandals. At once, Geta gathered a small escort of palace guards and set off toward Jagoog with orders that carried the king's pride like a spear. When the messengers arrived in Jagoog, dust on their sandals and authority in their voices, the villagers gathered with curiosity and fear. They went straight to the compound of Enda and Sira. One of the guards stepped forward and announced, by command of King Zubiri Danlady of Teninga, you are summoned to the palace at once. Your son bears a name that climbs too high. The king himself will decide its fate. The villagers murmured. Some shook their heads. Others looked at Enda with sympathy, or was it fear? Yangal Baat, though still a child, looked calmly at the men on horseback. He did not hide behind his mother. He did not cry. He simply watched, silent as a lake before the first ripple. Sira's heart trembled, but she did not show it. Enda placed his hand on his son's shoulder and said only one thing. The wind does not break the tree that knows how to bend. The journey to the palace would not just test their feet, but their fate. Seasons passed over the land like the shadows of great birds. The harmattan came and went, the rains returned and departed, and still the whispers of Yangal Baat's wisdom stirred the hearts of many. Some praised the boy with awe, others watched with guarded eyes, wondering what path fate would carve for him. One quiet evening, as the red sun dipped low and the baobab trees cast long silhouettes upon the earth, an unexpected visitor arrived at the home of Yangal Baat's parents. It was Da Yelgumi, the village elder and keeper of the ancestral customs. He was a man of many years, his face lined with stories and his staff carved with symbols of old knowledge. Yangal Baat greeted him with respect, bowing his head as the elder approached the family's courtyard. Da Yelgumi sat upon a woven mat laid out by the boy's mother and spoke in a slow, solemn voice. The spirits of old Jagoog have spoken, he said. They say that a child born with the name of kings must prove not only his mind, but his heart. Wisdom without humility can turn into wind that destroys huts. The boy's father listened carefully and asked, Elder, what must be done? Da Yelgumi tapped his staff on the ground softly. Greater than, there will be a test. An ancient one, known only to a few. At the rise of the next full moon, 3 riddles will be given before the council of elders and the ancestors who still walk unseen. If the boy answers with truth and understanding, his name shall be honored. If he fails, his name must be hidden, and his parents must not speak it again. The courtyard became still, even the goats nearby seemed to listen. Yangal Baat did not tremble or protest. He simply nodded once, his eyes calm. I will face whatever the ancestors bring, he said quietly. The elder studied him for a long moment, then gave a faint smile, a rare gift from a man of his age. Greater than, so be it. But remember, riddles are not always about words. Sometimes, they are about silence. Sometimes, they are not asked with the mouth. That night, the boy's mother could not sleep. She sat by the cooking fire long after the stars had blanketed the sky, whispering prayers to the spirits of her foremothers. The father watched his son from the doorway of their hut, wondering what the elders would ask and whether the boy's wisdom would hold. Yangal Baat, however, rested as peacefully as a newborn. For he had learned, even in his youth, that fear clouds the mind like dust in the wind, and the only way to see the path is to remain still within. Far away, in his palace chambers, the king heard of the coming test through his messengers. He sat alone, his golden bracelets resting heavily on his wrists. A single thought troubled him. Was the wisdom of this boy a threat to his power, or a gift to his kingdom? The moon crept closer to fullness, and the spirits of the land stirred with anticipation. The story was only beginning. The days that followed were heavy with silence and expectation. In the village of Jagoog, even the market women spoke in lowered voices, as though the very ground was listening. Children paused their games when Yangal Baat passed, staring with wide eyes full of wonder and doubt. The full moon was 3 nights away. On the first night, Yangal Baat sat beside his father outside their hut. The stars were many, scattered like cowries on dark cloth. His father broke the silence. "My son, the elders say this test is older than the throne itself.